Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Heather Shea. Today we are talking about Gen Z student affairs educators, the latest generation of new professionals to join our campus ranks. I'm thrilled to discuss this topic with two Generation Z experts, Dr. Corey Seemiler and Dr. Meghan Grace. Student Affairs Now is a premier podcast and learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We hope you'll find these conversations make a contribution to the field and are restorative to the profession. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays, and you can find us at studentaffairsnow.com or on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Today, we welcome our new sponsorship partner, LeaderShape. LeaderShape is a not-for-profit organization that has been partnering with colleges, universities, and organizations in creating transformational leadership experiences since 1986. With a focus on creating a more just, caring, and thriving world, LeaderShape provides both virtual and in-person leadership development opportunities for students and professionals. When you partner with LeaderShape, you will receive quality development experiences that engage learners in topics of courageous dialogue, integrity, equity, resilience, and community building. To find out more about our virtual programs, please visit www.leadershape.org/virtual programs. You can also learn more about the LeaderShape organization on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Today's episode is also sponsored by Anthology. If your goal is to create an effective assessment, boost data fluency, and empower staff with strategic data collection, and use results for change, look no further. No matter where your campus is in the assessment journey, Anthology, formerly Campus Labs, can help you figure out what's next with a short assessment. You'll receive customized results and tailored recommendations to address your most immediate assessment needs. Learn more about how Anthology's products and expert consultations can empower your division with actionable data by visiting campuslabs.com/SA-now. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Heather Shea. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am broadcasting from East Lansing, Michigan, near the campus of Michigan State University. MSU occupies the stolen lands of the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. Thank you so much to my panelists today. Let's get on with the conversation. Welcome to Student Affairs Now, Corey and Meghan. As each of you introduce yourselves, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your current role and maybe share a little bit about how you got interested in researching and reporting on Gen Z. Corey, I'll start with you. Welcome.
Great, thanks, Heather. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Corey Seemiler, and I'm currently an associate professor of leadership studies at Wright State University. But I wear many, many hats. I teach in an undergraduate organizational leadership program, a master's in leadership development program, and I teach in our master's in a higher education and student affairs program. So I kind of have my hands in all sorts of levels and topics, and it's been a lot of fun. The kind of interesting part too is that, as we look at Gen Z, I have the ability and the great fortune of being able to interact with them on so many different planes. So I have them as my students in my graduate classes. I have them as my students in my undergraduate classes. And then I study them. And then my favorite role ever is that I am a parent of a Gen Zer. And so I am inundated with Gen Z all around. I really got interested in them from my former institution where we were recruiting students for our leadership program and realized we just needed to think differently about how to appeal to students of today. And so one thing led to another, and a study led to a book, and here we are many years later with a great interest and passion in continuing the study of Generation Z.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And Corey and my path crossed back in 2001, I think, at the University of Arizona. So it's fun to see you again and see all the things that you've done since then. Meghan, welcome to Student Affairs Now. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Heather. Thanks for having me. My name is Meghan Grace. I use she, her, hers pronouns. In my current role, I serve as a consultant with Plaid LLC, and I primarily oversee our research and assessment initiatives that we provide for our clients, a little bit of curriculum development. So the work that I'm doing, really, we do a lot of work with higher ed institutions and with nonprofits working in the higher ed space. And so we're really designing solutions for professionals that are working with Gen Z students, which is a really awesome opportunity that I have. And then Another thing that I do is I'm an affiliate researcher with the University of Tennessee at Knoxville with the Post-Secondary Education Research Center. And so I'm able to do some really cool work around what we're doing right now is COVID student engagement and how the student affairs profession is adapting day by day in the way that we try to impact students. And I'm also working on some fraternal related research projects. So thinking about very niche areas of student life within the fraternity and sorority life space. So I really, since I think even we first had our first conversation around Gen Z with Student Affairs Live, we've all kind of taken new pathways into the ways we work with Gen Z. And Corey and I have been on this journey. Wow, I try to count it, and every year it seems more and more magnificent. I think we're on year 7 now, thinking about Generation Z from a more research perspective and thinking about designing resources for readers and people that want to learn about Generation Z and integrate that into their work. So as Corey mentioned, we got into this just because we were working in student affairs and wanted to understand our students a little bit better. And I always say it was like the best Bob Ross happy accident we ever made in learning about these students and how it's created this amazing journey for us.
I love it. Yes, we will link to that other episode on Student Affairs Live so folks can watch our conversation from several years ago when your book, Gen Z Comes to College, first came out. So it's fun to re-engage. So we're going to talk specifically about student affairs educators who are members of Generation Z today, but let's begin by talking about who do we mean when we refer to Gen Z, what age range is represented, and if you had to give this generation a tagline, what would it be? Meghan, do you want to kick us off with that topic?
Yeah, we generally use the age range of people born between 1995 and 2010 for those who were born in Generation Z. So really fast math, the very youngest are turning 11 this year and the very oldest are turning 26, which is wild to think that Generation Z is turning 26. That means I'm also turning an age older than 26, which is a fun treat. But when we think about this, we've really seen them grown up from high school students through college, and now they're in the student affairs world and in the profession. I think that there's a lot they're going to offer our profession, which I'm excited to cover more in this conversation. When I think about a tagline, this is a tough one for me to think about because there's so much going on with Gen Z in a really fascinating and amazing way. But when I had to boil it down, I would say they're digitally connected change makers. And I put a comma between digitally connected and change makers because they don't just rely on technology to make the change possible. But that is something we absolutely have to recognize is the digital nature of the world that they've grown up in because it's so vastly different than previous generations. I think if I think more about that, the definition of Generation Z, yes, other generations have used technology and we've seen digital technology emerge and evolve over time, but they've literally never lived in a world without the internet. Like not a single day of their remembered existence has the internet not existed. And so that is a huge factor in this generation today. But that's not the only thing that I think they're going to bring into the workplace and especially not into the student affairs profession.
So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking, about the specifics of other generations, but what's a quick resource if folks want to do that backstory and understand all the generations that came before Gen Z?
I think one that we initially always point people to would be the first few chapters of our most recent book, which is Generation Z, A Century in the Making. And we really frame it to be a deep dive into Generation Z, but we can't do a deep dive into Gen Z before we understand the generations that come before them. And so we actually provide a breakdown of each of the, what we would call like 5 or 6 modern generations that we're seeing in existence today, from the GI generation all the way through millennials. And we talk about the context that shape them. And it allows readers to understand generational theory a little bit better, generational cohorts, and then how all of that mixes together to help us create a multi-generational society that we live in. The other resource that I would direct people to is we actually have an online course called Understanding Generations. And that's really where we break down different components of generational theory and how we start to think about each generational cohort in their unique nature. And we provide an overview of each of our modern generations as well. We have to give a lot of love to previous generations because they did so much to create the world that Generation Z is growing up in, but also reacting to and interacting with.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, also as a parent of 2 Gen Zs, like they are I guess indirectly or maybe directly affected by both their grandparents and by my generation, right? Because we are the ones who are raising them. So our lenses are obviously part of that too. So the age range you just stated, Megan, 95 to 2010. So as you said, current 11 to 26-year-olds. So Corey, it seems like that means that the oldest members are potentially our current master's students and new professionals. How are Gen Z new professionals different from millennials or Gen Xers?
Well, I'll start by sharing a funny story. So I was teaching a class about Generation Z. It was a graduate level class a few summers ago. And I thought I was teaching it to people who were going to learn about Generation Z. And out of my student body, I had a number of students that were actually Gen Zers in the class. And that's when it occurred to me, they're here and getting ready to go out and do, their grad assistants on campus and do, student affairs work. And so that's been a really interesting shift to kind of think about how are we teaching about Gen Z to Gen Z. And a lot of people say, well, that's not necessary because they know themselves. But it is in some ways because the context is different, right? And student affairs professionals who are working with maybe undergraduate students in particular, kind of understanding what those roles they play, even if they share many of the same characteristics, is really important to be able to delineate. I think, one of the things that we talk about a lot in our books and our research is this idea of context, and that context matters. I remember when I was an RA and it was my last year in college, and my hall director was hunkered over a computer and it was a black screen with a green cursor. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm sending a prof." And I said, "What in the world is a prof?" And she goes, "I don't know. It's like this mail thing where you can send a message to somebody else on the campus." That was apparently the name for the inter-campus email system that had just been invented. So I had literally gone through my entire undergraduate experience without this idea of email, and even entering into my grad assistantships and early student affairs work, we didn't have the kind of technology and the kind of access and influence and the things that our new professionals have today. And so I think it's really important to keep that context in mind. But more particularly, that's more particularly interesting is this idea of who Gen Z is as these new professionals. And one of the big markers of them, and as Megan alluded to, is being these change makers. I mean, they feel a great sense of not just duty, but just draw and calling to make a difference in the lives of others. And what a great alignment for student affairs, right? I mean, I worked for many, many years, almost 2 decades in student affairs, and we know that we do a lot of work because we love the students and we care about the students, and we know that we're making a difference for them. And we also know that, we're not going to be the richest people in town, but we don't do it for that. And to find a generation that already comes into this profession with that mentality means we might have more retention, where they say, I feel like I'm every day I go to work, I feel like I'm making a difference, that maybe I want to stay. And it's okay if I don't advance. It's okay if I don't make a lot of money, which is what a lot of Gen Zers are saying. So I really think that there's this bigger calling for them that's in alignment to the kinds of things that we're looking for and having kind of longer term retention of student affairs professionals.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we're going to pick up on that topic here in a little bit too. So Megan, tell me about what you see as some of the common misperceptions of this generation that we should be cautious of and not making assumptions about what their needs are or attributes are.
So I think one would be that very misconception that all they want to do is be online and that they only want to connect digitally and that they only need to talk to their boss via text message or GChat or whatever messaging platform they use. We saw this even prior to the pandemic, that this is a generation that craves human connection, whether that's face-to-face or in person, that they are very apt to even willing to be jumping on a video conference than ever before, because they're missing human connection. And I mean, we've seen it in our qualitative work that they share that technology is great. Like, you can connect with a lot of people quickly, but that doesn't mean it's always the highest quality interaction. So I think that's one misperception that we're seeing, is that just because they can always be connected doesn't mean that that's the only way that they want to be connected. So there is going to be this, I think, even more so a desire of wanting to be together, whether that is in person or online through video communication, but they want to be with people, if you will. I think the other one is this, something that is, I think, pervasive in Gen Z culture, which I think will be interesting to keep an eye on as we move into the professional world of Generation Z, would be the influence, like the role of influencers and who influences their values. Right now, we're seeing, especially with TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, that online celebrities are people that matter to Generation Z, but at the same time, they don't. Like, they matter for entertainment. And when we look at who matters in terms of influencing their values and decisions, we tend to see that it's people that are very close to home. So it's going to be parents and family members, mentors, coaches, and their friends. And so the role that these relationships play, it's really the people that they are able to connect with in person that are going to have an impact on their values. And I think that how that translates to what we're looking at in the workplace is that good mentorship, good supervision, and good workplace relationships are only going to be even more critical with this generation. I think that we all recognize the importance of having good coworkers and colleagues, but with this generation, especially with where we're at with the pandemic and the desire for connection, having people that you enjoy being around and that can influence you in positive ways and creating a productive and healthy work environment is going to be at the forefront of this generation. So I would say two misconceptions would be how they interact online and who they interact with is very different, I think, than what they want in real life when they're not online.
Interesting. That's super interesting. Yeah, when the COVID pandemic just first started, my older kid who hosted a weekly Dungeons and Dragons game at our house was devastated. And then he figured out he could do a really similar thing using Roll20 online. And it was like all of a sudden his world just opened back up again because it was like he needed that interaction. Okay to not go to school, but if I don't get to do the D&D, it's going to really change the way I am in the world for him. So you two have written several books together. I think we're going to post those in the links. Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned over the years in researching Gen Z? Corey, I'll start with you, and then both of you can kind of pick up. And what are some of the broadest takeaways?
Well, I think one of the things that I think we learned as researchers, not necessarily about the generation itself, is that we didn't really know that a lot of generational researchers don't do qualitative data collection. They do a lot of polls
Yeah.
And so when we started asking open-ended questions, we were getting these amazing stories behind the numbers. And for me, I learned that is just way more interesting, but also gives more voice to this generation. So much so that when we did our second study, we pretty much, other than the demographic questions, only asked open-ended questions because we really wanted to hear the voices of the students. So that was a kind of a learning moment as a researcher to say, how can we best approach trying to understand Generation Z? Now, of course, we've had a lot of like individual takeaways, and we'll be talking about those all through today. But I think for me, the biggest thing was being able to try to provide voice and space for Gen Z to tell us what they really think about things, even if it's things that we might not want to hear or we're not ready to hear.
Yeah, Megan, how about you?
For me, there's, I think it's two-part. There's never going to be a conclusive, comprehensive, representative generational study. That's maybe just a warning to anyone listening out there that there's no one study that's ever going to be able to capture an entire generation. It's impossible. And so that's really where Corey and I have encouraged ourselves to stay fervent in this mindset of how do we triangulate and develop a little bit more of a comprehensive view, utilizing lots of different resources and different studies that we're conducting, but that other people are also conducting to find the really important themes. Because you can't just gather all of the generation and pull them. It's so impossible to do. So that would be one. And then there's just so many layers. There's so many elements of interconnectedness of the findings that we have. And that's where the qualitative nature of some of the work that we do has been really helpful, as Corey mentioned, to just illuminate a little bit more of those interconnections. But when we find a study around, maybe one quantitative study that has found this one thing, there might be another study that's allowing us to understand a little bit more of the why and the intersection there, and the many different societal contexts that are shaping that it's not just a political influence, and it's not just a social influence, and it's not just a technological influence. Especially in the last year, we've seen all three of those things collide heavily, that there's so much going on, and I don't want to say noise, but there is a lot that we have to sift through and understand how it all works together, which I think when we first started the study, we were like, let's just ask what they like and see what happens. And then I distinctly remember Corey and I being like, maybe we'll write an article about this. And I remember we had coffee, we were sitting in the student union, we're like, maybe we'll write an article about this. And we thought that was so ambitious, and here we are. So you never know where
I love it. I love it. Well, I know one of my early questions was about how you generalize, and I think the answer is a qualitative response, right? I mean, to be able to look at individual voices is really important. So I'm happy to hear that, because aggregating all that data, making one statement about this is what a generation is, is tough. So I don't know if you want to say anything more about the methodology piece, but I find that really interesting as a qualitative researcher myself, that the individual voices and stories really matter.
Mhm. Yeah, Heather, I'll definitely address that. I get asked a lot in my presentations, can you tell me about Gen Zers in, rural Oklahoma that were homeschooled or something? And it's like, no, not really. There's just so many nuances and so many levels of understanding. But I think a couple of the key things that we try to keep in mind, of course, we're guided by qualitative data, and that definitely allows us to really try to represent voices. The other things, though, that are really important is that we frame our research in something called peer personality. And this basically is this idea that what happens in someone's lives between the ages of about 14 and 24 fundamentally shape the way that they see and navigate the world. And so while we're all going through like the pandemic right now, certainly people in this age group are going to take something with them that we are not. We have no context for taking it with us. And what that does is, by having those formative experiences during that time, it really does shift worldviews in ways that it doesn't necessarily do that for older people. So our goal is to look at the pure personality of Gen Z, not necessarily the disaggregated by every possible strand, because the pure personality is a reflection of all of those cultural influences that Meghan talked about. The other thing that's really interesting that we came across with this data is that there were so many measures, not just qualitatively in the things that we looked at with themes, but even quantitatively in other studies as well, is that where numbers were off the charts. They were up 90%, 100%. I mean, at some point in time, you just don't disaggregate because everyone puts a certain response. And to us, that was really shocking, because we started comparing Gen Z data to particularly like millennial data. We found that there was just much higher off the charts for almost every measure, where there was a much stronger peer personality. And this doesn't mean that there's not differences and there's not diversity. It just means that these are really strong indicators. And so that was really, really important. And then the last thing is really, sometimes our, the N, the number of people in the study is just far too low to break it down into groups. But we were able to do that with our politics study. And we couldn't break it down by all races, but by looking at white and then looking at people who didn't select white as one of their racial indicators, we found literally no difference across the measures. So again, this is, from a researcher standpoint, this is kind of the golden ticket. You like this because it does do some affirmation in the work that we do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, go ahead, Meghan.
To add on to that, Corey, like we would love to be able to do that, but to break it down even further. But if we start to disaggregate so far, you just seek to find what you want to find, and it becomes like confirmation. So if you want to find that rural students who grew up in rural counties, like if you're asking the question, you kind of probably know what the influence of a rural upbringing might be on a student. And if that changes so heavily. But I always go back to our first study, like we had heavy representation of people from Oklahoma that we didn't know if they were from rural areas, but even then we were seeing that those findings aligned with other studies in terms of thematic findings. So perspectives and their values were still similar. And so maybe the concept of, and that's something we're going to try to tease out in future research, does the situation of your hometown really influence that much of your peer personality with your generation as much as some people might think it does? Because I think anecdotally, as we saw in the last year or two of people sharing, especially having tough political conversations with their family members, that growing up, where you grew up doesn't always indicate how you're going to have a worldview. It might have some role in it, but I think we're seeing a little bit more of that blending than we anticipated. So the disaggregation component of our research is a little bit tough to get into.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So let's shift to talking a little bit about what this means for working with student affairs educators who are members of Gen Z. So in your latest book, A Century in the Making, Generation Z, A Century in the Making, you describe 4 major characteristics of Gen Z. It's integrity, openness, tenacity, and care. So talk a little bit about what brought about those, what social forces maybe created those characteristics, and then how might these characteristics show up as those of us who aren't members of Generation Z, engage with student affairs educators who are Generation Z. Meghan, do you want to go with this? Yeah.
Absolutely. So when we were trying to distill this, and this is such a hard question to try to answer, like how do you describe a generation? What? That's a very big question. And so
Yeah.
we actually looked to both our studies where we asked Generation Z to describe themselves. We felt like that was a pretty worthwhile endeavor to have their voice be present in that. And then we looked to a few other large scale data sets, and then other studies that are asking similar things. And what are really the synonyms that popped up in all of those studies to think about some themes in describing this generation. And so we didn't just pick these out of open air. I do want to say that. But when we think about integrity, I think about the societal factor of how this generation has seen in many ways disingenuousness in a bunch of different systems. So we've seen it with public figures, corporations, and the government of where when integrity is shown to not be present, what that means to the people involved. And so I think that there's an element of generation wants to do right people, and that they feel responsible to doing the right thing for others. And whether they see that in older generations or not, that's something that they are really taking adoption to, of like doing the right thing is very important. Openness. We see this with every generation is a little bit more open-minded about social issues. We've certainly seen that in the last 60 to 70 years with each generation being more and more open-minded to social topics, whether that is the way that we're looking at civil rights, or we're looking at gender identity, or we're looking at sexual orientation. We can kind of see that the mindset of social issues, it broadens as new generations come up. But I think that this is going to be even more prominent with this generation, with the role that authenticity plays. Like with integrity comes this value and desire for authenticity with this generation of being who you are. If you want to have the confidence to be who you are, you hope that there are people that are open-minded and to accept you for that. So those two are kind of going hand in hand. Tenacity, we've kind of bridged this where we see in our study and a few other studies that this generation describes themselves as hardworking and responsible. So wanting to do not only the right thing, but they want to do a good job at doing the right thing. And so we're seeing this also coupled with being raised predominantly by Generation X parents that have been handing down this message of hard work is important, doing the right thing is important. And so we're seeing that come together. And then care, I think, really just wraps up all of this of doing the right thing, working hard, but then also having access to information to learning about social issues, and having a personal responsibility to feeling like they can address those social issues. And I think that's where we see care come into this place of they might see issues that maybe don't impact them personally, like it might not necessarily impact them on their day to day, but they've got friends that an issue might impact, or they see it in their community and they want to help other people. I think all four of these characteristics are really important to think about the role of student affairs educators play on campus. We want people that have integrity, that work hard, that are open-minded and accepting and care about other people. So I think that we see that in present and in older generations, but with this generation having such self-identity in these areas, I think it's going to have a wave of new professionals coming into the field, really encouraging this, but also expecting this, both from leaders and the people that they work with. Like they want to work with people that are authentic and practice authentic leadership with integrity. But they're not going to be able to practice their tenacity if they don't find that connection, that open-mindedness with the people that they work with. So at its heart, student affairs is a caring profession. It's a helping profession. I think it's going to be a very welcome place for Generation Z professionals.
That's great. Corey, I think you mentioned earlier about this idea of engaging in meaningful work. And as I engage and connect with the students who are part of our Master's in Student Affairs program, like I'm definitely seeing that as a driver for their interest in this profession, is that it is, in their mind, meaningful work. Can you talk a little bit about how that plays out in our workplaces, and suggestions you might have for those of us who are from Gen X, supervising Gen Zs, and kind of getting that motivation and focus to center within our workplace environments?
Yeah, that's a great question, and particularly because we think of Gen X in the context with which Gen X comes to the supervisory relationship, and certainly we can talk about other generations too. But I think with Gen X is remembering that they're really marked by this idea of autonomy and self-direction, very practical and pragmatic. And when it comes to supervising Gen Z, there's a little bit of a disconnect in some sense that can be overcome if both generations are aware of the situation. So in one sense, Gen Z wants to do well, they want to do right. And sometimes they need to be able to have someone at a supervisory level that's a little more involved with them than they probably are used to having, at least the Gen X or supervisor is. I know Gen X supervisors want to say, here, go ahead, this is your program, you're the GA or you're the new professional, go run with it, let me know in our one-on-one how it goes. But Gen Z wants to be able to collaborate, and they want to be able to bounce ideas off of their Gen X supervisor, because it's so important for them to be able to make a difference and to do what Megan was talking about, to do right, that they want to make sure that they're on the right track. And so that means that Gen X needs to probably be a little bit more mindful of being, at least in the front end, a little bit more involved, maybe showing them or demonstrating how something works, or sitting down with them as they work through their first, workshop proposal kind of thing, whatever it might be that they're working on, and really being there on the front end. But Gen Z is a little bit like their Gen X, parental generation, in which once they feel like they have it, they're good to go, and then you can let them go. So that's a really important delineation, because I think Gen X is predisposed to say, hey, I trust you, this is a compliment to you that I'm leaving you alone. But Gen Z might feel that they want a little bit more involvement. The other thing too is that Gen Z, needs a lot of feedback, and this isn't really all that new, because millennials also needed a lot of feedback. So Gen X is pretty much used to this, but Gen Z really is okay with getting critical feedback. They want to know if they mess something up. They want to know if they're not on the right track, because remember, the context matters. And they're coming of age in a time in which the digital world is just predisposed to judging each other. I mean, we literally have built-in buttons of thumbs up and thumbs down. They don't want to be, publicly humiliated by doing or saying something that makes them look or feel bad about what they're engaging in. And so getting that feedback early on is super important, saying, hey, I'm going to redirect you. And they'll say, thank you. I really needed that. I really wanted that. So it's, again, that involvement and that care that they're feeling that they need. But I think most importantly, and this is something to really remember, is that Gen Z's relationship with their parents, again, this is a pure personality trait, not all of them, but is really this idea of co-pilot. Now, remember, we're coming off of millennials where their parents might have been more like helicopter pilots, where they flew over and sort of, monitored the situation. Gen Z is looking for their parents to be very involved in their day-to-day lives, in their situations. They're looking for them to be in these roles of coaches and mentors. And in some sense, it's not surprising they would look to their Gen X supervisors in this in loco parentis kind of way. You're not just my supervisor, and I don't want to just be your friend, like we saw sometime, at some points in higher ed, is I want you to be my life coach. And I'm looking to you for that role. And so again, it's going to pull Gen X in a little bit more into the relational side of supervision than maybe some of them have been used to doing.
Fascinating. That explains a lot, actually. I was just called by some of our master's cohort their mom, and I was like, oh. But that might be part of where that's coming from a little bit, because I can totally see that for sure. So I think about these challenges around supervision and generations, and can you talk a little bit more about what other challenges you might see as we see an influx of Gen Zers entering the student affairs profession? So just expand upon that a little bit more. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a couple things too that are, we take it out of the context of Gen X and really just look at supervising Gen Z. As we've talked about before, the ability to make a difference is really important. Now, remember, Gen Z sees this on two levels, right? I'm making a difference for my students, but I'm also making a difference for my students so that they can make a difference for others. And there's that layer, and that's a, kind of, like I said, a calling, or, in some sense, this feeling of responsibility that they want to do right by their students. So they need to feel like that they're making some type of a difference. And, having worked in student affairs long enough to know, we sometimes get pulled into bureaucratic moments and political things and administrative tasks that just seem to have no end to them. And while we need to do that, because there's purpose for those things, sometimes it will go a long way to sit down with Gen Z and talk about how those particular processes that you're asking them to do actually do make a difference. Like, I'm asking you to fill out this annual report, not because we have to turn it in, but I'm asking you to fill this out because it's important that we showcase what we're doing so that we can get feedback and know how we can get more resources to make the kind of difference that we know that we're making. So that's the kind of messaging that needs to happen, so that those processes that feel like they're just out of the scope of, quote, making a difference are really also about making a difference. I think the other thing, and we haven't really talked much about this yet, is, Gen Z it has higher levels of diagnosed anxiety and depression than any other generation before them, for multiple reasons. higher rates, higher reporting, better access to support. But with that said, it's important for supervisors to know and be able to recognize any kind of red flags that may come up that they say, my Gen Zer needs some support. I mean, you have to remember this generation is feeling the weight of the world on them. In our stories project, we asked them questions about things that worried them. And a lot of them talked not just about what worried them, but they talked about this overwhelming sense of responsibility to be the ones to solve the problems. And we're talking about 18 and 19-year-olds that are filling the survey out that are basically saying, I feel responsible for ending climate change. Like when I was 18 and 19, those were not the things I was thinking about. And so they're dealing with the everyday weight of the world, right? Just like everyday issues that we all face, but they're also having these societal things just literally sitting on them. And it's tough. And as supervisors, we need to be really in tune to where our new professionals are at so we can provide the best kind of support that we need to do.
Well, that's really powerful, and a good reminder for sure. And so let's switch to talking a little bit about, and we've alluded to it a little bit, the pandemic in particular. So there's lots of generational markers, right? The common cohort experiences. I'm thinking of the Vietnam War and economic collapses, the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And so really early in the pandemic, like maybe the week that we all went in quarantine, I said to my two Gen Zer kids born in 2005 and 2007 that this is going to be the defining moment of their generation. And I think, frankly, it's probably been the defining moment for everybody who's currently alive and being affected. But I'm curious about, like, what does a COVID campus response look like? And how do think about new professionals who are coming into this profession and in a very different modality in terms of working online, being isolated from one another, canceled spring breaks, no more study abroad, like all of these kind of generational, college experience markers that end up being really important. The folks who are coming into our student affairs roles and who are entering our master's programs maybe missed some of that. So what does this look like, and how do we kind of make meaning of that? And this might be like your next book, right? COVID effects on Gen Z. Corey, do you want to start? No, I have another question for you, Megan.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to this, that we have to admit that we cannot relate to what they're going through. We have to admit that. I don't know what it is like to have missed a study abroad experience that I was supposed to go on. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it was like to miss my graduation. I don't know what that was like. But we can empathize, and we can say that what you're experiencing is something that's unique. My daughter was in 5th grade this last year, and she was supposed to have her graduation, and it was the same old, the chairs in a row facing the stage, and they get their little diplomas, and they didn't have it. But you know what they did? They had something that was about 20 times better than that. So while we want to acknowledge that there is a sense of loss, there is a sense of innovation. And while this generation is at the forefront of creating social change, the fact that they were the first ones to experience some of the good, some of the bad of the innovation that came from COVID is really a remarkable milestone in their own development. And so, yeah, I don't know what it's like, but I can empathize, and I can say, you know what, I can learn from you, because whatever that felt like, I want to make sure that we make sure that students, don't feel disempowered, and that they do feel that they're validated and they're important in this process. And so I think it just comes down to kind of a philosophical approach to how we really try to embrace and understand and listen to our students, our new professionals, our graduate students, and what it is that they need to be supported.
Yeah, Megan, talk a little bit about preparing graduate students. So thinking about that kind of first, frontline folks who are coming into graduate assistantships or coming into new professional roles, who are engaging with the high school students who didn't have a high school graduate, or whatever those experiences of difference were. How do we help them kind of think about what that means to work with students whose end of high school is so different?
I think it's, and kind of building off what Corey said, we have to recognize that when we're working with students coming out of high school and, even just in college today, they've got a COVID filter on everything moving forward. That's the best way to put it. If we live in a filtered world these days, they've got a special COVID filter. whether that's a loss of a milestone or a celebratory experience at the end of their senior year, or new student orientation looking incredibly different than it ever has. All of the built up momentum that I think we put at that part of being 17, 18, 19, starting college, just it has a very different look and feel. And so recognizing that difference and trying, again, being empathetic to it, but realizing that there's also a lot of resiliency that was practiced by young people today, and the understanding of how they made personal sacrifices for the greater good at such a young age. Mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever you want it to be, we have to also recognize that. And so finding still moments to celebrate is important. I think when we're thinking about graduate students who are going to go on and directly work with incoming students, that it's not only recognizing the COVID filter, but also recognizing what that might mean for the students. I think we're going to see students looking at the college experience cautiously, and I say cautiously in a variety of different ways. The way that they interact on campus, I think it might open up different conversations around public health on campuses and campus safety in general, and paving the way for maybe more productive conversations around health. But I think also the fragile nature of the campus experience, as we saw last spring, of students being flown home the next day from their study abroad and no graduation. And so I think we'll see the value of those, but I think there's gonna be a lot of students that are cautious about, okay, well, if there's another outbreak, am I gonna have to go home? Does it make more sense for me to just go to school right down the road? And so I think that that's communicating to the profession in the field in general, the importance of having really strong engagement to keep students, whether they're on campus or off campus for their semester, feeling connected to the university. And then I think the final thing that we have to prepare graduate students for is this idea of coaching and role modeling, resiliency, and self-care. I think that both of those things got a lot of attention, especially from a professional sense of looking at self-care, not just everyone tell me how you're practicing it, but like truly committing to it, and making that a culture, not just in managing pandemic stress, but one day when we live in a world where we're not confronted with this, I think that we also have to grapple with the fact that there were some self-care issues going on within the profession prior. Burnout was still present. It was a very different burnout, but burnout was present. It was present, and there's a reason why people were leaving the field. So what does that say more about our profession, and how can we help graduate students develop those self-care and those mental health practices earlier on in their professional career, to not only potentially keep the longevity of their career within the field, but also so that they can role model and coach our students more effectively. So I think those are a few of the areas, but the COVID filter, we're going to live in it for a little while, and we have to recognize that students went through a lot. They're very resilient, but we have to commend them for the sacrifice they made and do our best to celebrate the moments that we can with them.
Yeah, really, really well said. I think that's going to be, it's like you said, it's going to be with us for a while. And I think when we think about kind of what does it mean to return, Keith's episode last week was all about like what should we be restoring, what should evolve, and what should transform on our campuses. And I think there's really this quest for some level of normalcy, right? And Corey, you wrote about this in a Medium blog post, which I'll put in the show notes also, about in what ways do Gen Z professionals kind of serve as a part of that normalcy, as well as promote it for students, and what does it mean? What is normalcy now, and from a kind of a generational lens?
Yeah, this has been such an interesting phrase, right? The new normal. We hear it all the time, right? This is the new normal. And I've always pushed back on that. I don't think that we've reached the new normal. I think we're in a transition phase where we're questioning what we want to be doing in the future and what we should be doing in the future. And if we were using our time wisely, particularly in higher education, we would be looking at that which works and that which does not, and taking an opportunity to learn from our own best practices. As Megan alluded to, self-care, this has illuminated it to the point where we can say, wow, maybe our new normal when we get there will be much more around self-care. And so the role of Gen Z is a very interesting one, because they're basically our graduate students, they're our new professionals, they're the frontline workers during this quest for the new normal that we haven't gotten to. So the things that they're embarking on are setting the tone for us to say, does that work? Does that not work? For instance, at my own institution, they were always struggling with, trying to figure out how to best do new student orientation. And they've tried various ways, and they're successful in many different realms. But this provided a way of saying, hey, we have to do it differently because we can't all come together. What can we do? And all of a sudden, there's some amazing pieces of new student orientation that would never have been conceptualized had we not been in the COVID era. So potentially the new normal will retain some of those so that we can be more inclusive and spread, access much further, or be more engaging. Or do we, I'll be interested to see, 5 years out as we look at student organization, engagement. Potentially it could be up given the number of students who are able to engage while they're off campus, or they're working, because our Gen Z students work a lot. So it's our Gen Z student affairs folks that are the ones that are leading the charge. They are literally writing the guidebook for the new normal. And I think that that's exciting. And they're going to learn things that didn't work, and they're going to learn things that do work. And when we look back at this time in history and we talk about why we do the things we do in higher ed, we're going to look back on 2020 and 2021 at these Gen Z student affairs professionals that led the charge in trying out and all of these new ways of being to figure out how higher education student affairs is going to look in the future.
Wow, I love that. I have been thinking about this a bunch because I think we're all trying to kind of figure it out, right? So I love that there might be a bit of a secret decoder ring out there with our Gen Z folks. Thank you both so much for this awesome conversation. I know I could just keep talking on and on. I'm endlessly fascinated, I think, because of all the multiple hats that we all wear. So as we conclude every podcast here on Student Affairs Now, our title is Student Affairs Now. So really quickly, maybe as a result of this conversation, maybe just in general, broadly in your lives, what are you thinking about, pondering, questioning, troubling now? Meghan, I'll start with you.
Oh, I don't know if I'm troubling, or I think it's more questioning, pondering, especially as I still have quite a few friends and contacts that are working on campuses still. I think I'm pondering how we structure our work life in student affairs and higher education, because I do think that we have learned that being in your office at 8 a.m. and not leaving till 10 p.m. every day might not be the healthiest thing for people. And maybe that has some burnout problems. And so I think that it is going to, I foresee that there is going to be more conversation around you having flexible work life, whether that means being on campus for 3 days and at home for 2 days to, again, practice self-care, getting your work done, feeling like you're recharged and rest. And so I think that that's what I'm pondering is the life schedule of campus-based professionals potentially going to get a healthy makeover with what the pandemic has kind of put at our forefront to grapple with. So that's one thing I'm looking at is I'm hoping that we can have good, productive conversations around workplace design to have a healthier experience for everyone.
I absolutely agree. Corey, what about you? What are you thinking about, pondering, troubling?
Well, I think in terms of student affairs, I'm curious to see if some of these practices that we've been engaging in during this transition period are so alluring in some sense from a work perspective that we do increase the retention of people in student affairs as we start talking about that the things that we're doing really do make a difference in ways that we've always known that, but in ways that could be even better articulated by Gen Zers, and that we see students, again, after like 2 years in student affairs, we see people sometimes leaving the profession, but perhaps actually staying longer and saying, I was part of this innovation of this new normal. I'm part of this. I'm excited. I want to be here. I know I'm making a difference. Like I'm literally making a difference in people's lives, not just in their passions and their energies, but I'm saving lives. I mean, we are in COVID and maybe feeling this sense of great passion and even a stronger calling than before. So I'll be interested to see 10 years out about our retention of our student affairs educators, to see to what extent did this burn them out, right? Or to what extent was this just an energizing experience to take on a task that no generation before has been presented with in terms of doing this work. And I think that's exciting to be on the forefront of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of responsibility and also really a lot of energy around being the builders, right? The builders of whatever might be coming next. Thank you both so much for spending time with me today. Thanks to everybody who's listening. Thanks also to our sponsors, Anthology and Leadership, which has enabled us to engage a production assistant. So shout out to our new Student Affairs Now production assistant, Natalie Ambrosi. Thank you so much for your work in helping us keep Student Affairs on the air. So you can receive reminders about this and all of our episodes by subscribing to our Student Affairs Now newsletter, and of course, browse our growing archives at studentaffairsnow.com. Subscribe to our podcast, share on social, leave a 5-star review. Helps us continue to reach more folks and build a community of learners. I am Heather Shea. Thanks again to our fabulous guests and everybody who's watching and listening. Make it a great week, everyone.